All right. I've done this once before, so I'm going to do it again. Which is I'm going to start this episode with no clue what the hell I'm going to talk about. Sorry, I got subjects on my brain, but the fuck here. This be the... Oh, the lighter is empty. So is my brain. Alright, got some fluid. It's all expanded in the lighter though, so we gotta let it calm down here. Could be a goddamn blowtorch here. So this cigar, by the way, it got crunched in my box. It got between the dividers. And so I don't know if you can see this. This might be like Burgess Meredith smoking a devil cigar in Twilight Zone. We'll see what happens here. Watch it be the best cigar I've ever had in my life. No, guys, you gotta slam it in the door. Makes it better. No slamming cigar phase envelops the world. Oh, that bent tobacco. Well, it's a definite testimony to the Herrera-Stelli crash test. It's had a side impact, and it's still smoking great. And there's no chimney effects coming out of the side of the cigar. So, hey, maybe this episode's looking up already. So I've been thinking about things like one of the things that's starting to, well, Jesus, not even starting. One of the things that's been pissing me off is the obsolescence in technical devices, especially made by the company known as Apple. The shenanigans that they play that are, I guess, technically legal to do. It makes all your devices suck, right? Lying about how they only slow down your phones due to battery issues, but hell, my desktop slowed down too. You might have a teeny tiny battery to hang on to the time when it cycled off, but other than that, what they're doing is they're recompiling the operating system so it's incompatible with the pins inside your CPU. So as long as they upgrade your CPU, they're fucking you. And they only compile for the native CPU that's the latest one out the door. And so your computer has to do sort of a forwarding address to say, hey, where's the pin? And they're like, oh, no, you're coming in with the modern pin mapping. We have the old pin mapping. Here, use this interpretive layer of software to find the right place. And that delay of figuring out that they're in the wrong place and then redirecting them, that's where we're getting the slowdown. It's legal, but it's sort of like what would happen to Mercedes-Benz if they release cars and next year it just started going 10 miles an hour slower, and the year after that it goes 20 miles an hour slower from the point you purchased it. I think you could sue the fucking shit out of them, and it doesn't matter if you sign a little contract saying, I totally understand all these legalese because I have a fucking law degree from Harvard, iTunes, right? At some point, we have to have laws on the books that say you do not have the vocational ability to protect yourself from the legalese, and so therefore you can't enter into these types of agreements until you get counseling to make sure you do understand. But let's put the burden on the corporation or the douchebag writing the legalese. You're going to have to lawfully and legally describe to your potential client or customer what the hell you're talking about. You imagine that? If part of the law was that you had to not only write it in legalese, but you had to translate it in another language that's like normal language. Probably some disciplines as well. Okay, so we just dove into a little bit of legalese stuff. Is it legal to put obsolescence into products? And we're not talking about building it out of cheap materials and the materials fall apart. You have batteries in computers that swell up and explode. It's a little bit better these days, but my first, my second Apple laptop, I was working heavily with people at Apple at the tippy top, and I finally, it all happened within like a week when one of my batteries started to swell. And so I took it out, I got another battery, and then I put it in the closet, and then it must have swollen like 1 inch over its normal diameter, and part of it's like, half an inch below and half an inch above. And so I took a picture of it and I sent it directly into headquarters, and I said, "Hey, what's up with this?" And the reply came back, "Yeah, they do that." Oh, okay. It's not exactly on the brochure, is it? It's starting to come into focus here. Not exactly sure what to call this, but let's meander around a little bit about sort of the society looking the other way when people get screwed. Right? Let's go through some examples, because, my assertion is going to be that this shouldn't be possible. Right? What is the Fifth Amendment? Fifth Amendment is that you cannot be forced in a court of law to incriminate yourself. And that's kind of a paraphrase of it, right? But now, if you're Little Richard, you're Chuck Berry, and a ton of other folks, and you sign a record deal, and you produce some amazing music, you set the tone for what rock and roll is going to be, and the public then finds out you signed such a bad record deal that they got all the rights to your music, and you just got some money. When they sign a record deal that says, you get X amount of dollars for this and that, but we get to take out all of our expenses first out of your money, and you get what's left. That's a fuck deal. Mike Tyson got those deals from Don King, right? I mean, didn't he have like a purse that was like $150 million, and I think the guy got, I don't know, 3? Some really horrible number, maybe 30 or something. He's had so many bad moments like that, it's hard to keep track. But now here's society watching this occur. And what do? We currently, because there's a lot of money to be made on all sides of the fence here, the attorneys get to massage up all of the disagreements on both sides. I mean, do you realize that if you're in a divorce, you're trying to get to a divorce settlement, you have 2 divorce attorneys, your wife's got one, you have one, that these attorneys in almost every single case will contact each other behind the scenes, lay out a full strategy for keeping both the husband and the wife going for as long as their budget will allow, milking out every dime. She doesn't see anything, he doesn't see anything, really. The attorneys get it all. So society knows, like we all knew back in the 70s and 80s, that Chuck Berry and Little Richard got completely screwed out of their rights to own their own music. And I think Michael Jackson bought Little Richard's music and gave it back to him. But now, why did it take Michael Jackson to come in and buy that and give it back to him? Why didn't society come in and say, wait, let's see this contract here. Yeah, Mr., fucking record contract asshole. We know he signed it. But this is harm, right? You're supposed to live by common law. This is harm. You are stealing this man's property. Did you write the lyrics, Mr. Squirmy, wormy white guy? No. You didn't. Did you write any of the melodies? No. Did you ever get on stage and perform with him? No. Okay. Hey, we're not saying you shouldn't make money off this. We're just saying that's all you should get is a flat fee for what you contributed, a proportion of the profits. But in the end, this gentleman owns his own shit. So it seems to be this sort of weird mezzanine of being good and being bad, where these contracts get crafted and people get had, and then you can't believe it. And then what happens? You go to court, and They just look at the contract and say, did you sign this? Yes. Well, did you understand what you were signing? Not really. I thought I did. It was misrepresented to me or whatever. But in the end, usually the judge just says, well, there's nothing illegal about it, so you have to, suck it up. Aren't there riots going on right now for like the 5th week in France? They're bullshitting Americans that it's about a gas tax, when a giant group of them are wearing QAnon shirts. They're wearing pyramid shirts, these vests, the yellow vests. They're wearing these yellow vests with Q on them, with these Illuminati pyramid caps with scissors jammed in their eyes. I'd say France has had enough of this bullshit. And from what I understand, it's spreading all over Europe. And it seems healthy because it's not a civil war. It's the people saying, bring out the guillotines. Let's sharpen those babies up. Let's put some oil on those things, because we're going to line all you fucking aristocratic cocksuckers up, and we're going to cut your head off. One way or the other, symbolically or physically. It seems like that's what they're saying. It's a much needed step, in my opinion. Because again, this, I don't know. I mean, I love the word fuckery. I love it. It's like, it's a conniving bunch of bullshit that happens constantly, right? And because we're all fucking serfs, we're all brushing our teeth with goddamn fluoride, we just can't wait to get enough of it, right? Your banks screw you with fees, right? Trying to get a fucking, I don't know. Sorry about swearing. Just, it's a seasonal thing. Banks charge you all kinds of money to take money out of an ATM, right? They charge you money pretending like computer transfers actually cost them anything. Gasoline prices, just to stop on that for 1 second, it's all artificially inflated. This stuff's not a fossil fuel. Sorry to burst your bubble. And so all they do is they stop pumping it to create scarcity, but scarcity is all bullshit because, the funny thing is Saudi Arabia barely supplies oil to America. If anything, Mexico is like 25-30% of our oil from down south. So you never hear any complaints about what they're doing down there. They just pump it, we buy it, and it's great. We have a good relationship, right? Now we've opened up a bunch of our own wells, which we knew we always had, and now we've become, I've read 2 different locations, from both conservative and liberal locations, those fake paradigms, that we're now selling more oil than anyone. We're exporting it. All right. I just filled up my tank the other day for the cheapest I've had gas in, I don't know, 10 years. It's crazy. It's beautiful, right? But what's the old mantra of this show? Rebuilding society from the bottom up. And the descriptor that goes with that is to simply say, and again, we never thought that QAnon would ever be around, or Trump would ever be president, or France would ever be saying, screw you, in French. But the idea is, if we ever got control of the planet, we have to figure out a way, before we get control of the planet, how are we going to run this place? What are the standards? France has the upper hand. The citizens of France and the Yellow Jackets have the upper hand right now. They've got Macron hiding. He's fucking AWOL right now, right? He's letting the foreign minister, or prime minister, or whatever it is, foreign minister, take care of all this stuff. Wow. A hero is defined by his actions under pressure. Macron just ran and hid. Isn't that awesome, right? He showed his true colors. Okay. But what France has to remember is the coup in Russia. What's that all about? Well, I've covered it a couple times in different episodes, but the people were told by their controllers that they had won, right? Got rid of that bad Gorbachev, got rid of the USSR, right? Here's Yeltsin, complete fucking drunk. Unlike Putin, Yeltsin, was just a handshaker. Putin was a badass. Putin has a fucking huge IQ. Putin is physically very formidable, but he's also just mature as hell, perfect diplomat, amazing guy. Now, he may want me to be dead. Fuck, I don't know, right? I doubt it. But Yeltsin was a drunk that signed a bunch of loans with the IMF. Within 1 year, it all went tits up, and he owed 3 times as much. The old game that they played on South America to take the place over. But the reason why he became president was he got in the back of a car with a megaphone in a crowd and started saying, "We won, we won, we won." And of course, everybody wanted to hear that. So we would have done it too. They bid it hook, line, and sinker, and they said, "You're the guy in charge. He's the guy that said we won, and he's got diplomatic connections and World Bank connections." He did. Not for their benefit, of course. Putin has been repairing Yeltsin's damage to the country for the last 20 years. So again, France is in the streets. I think they're making a really good point. I don't believe at all it's exclusively about the gas tax. I'm sure that's on the list of items that they're pissed off about. It's being spun by the world press, Pessoa press, as nothing but a gas tax, but it's not. But how could we create a system by which we could protect normal citizens from predators? It sounds like a slippery slope, doesn't it? In the state of California, you have limitations by which you can charge interest on a late invoice as a corporation. But the state can break that rule like 100-fold, right? You could have a $5 penalty that turns into a $100 penalty. But if you had a $5 invoice with your neighbor or a customer and they miss one payment, they're 30 days late, 45 days late, 60 days late, you cannot give them a bill for $1,000. It's not allowed. Now, a lot of times, I would say this much. To say to me as a corporation that I can't come up with outrageous penalties, I think is great. Now, penalties are designed to inspire the customer who owes money to pay you, because you have this, you get the access to the Satanistic system called usury, right? This compound interest thing where you get to charge and charge and charge, and the penalties then exceed the principal debt that you actually had. But to put mechanisms in place to make sure that I don't go nuts with this mechanism, it's really labeled as a regulation. There's regulatory committees that keep you from doing those kind of things, right? They determine that sort of thing. Well, regulations can get dangerous, right? You can kill entire industries with one regulation. Every kid in America drinks before 21. They do, if they want to, right? Every kid smokes before they're 21, if they want to. We make it illegal. But, the police officers could find kids smoking constantly and bust them constantly if they really wanted to, but there's not enough money in it. So we make it symbolically illegal, but we don't enforce it. In California, there's an ordinance in most cities that you can't smoke within, I think, 20 feet of a door or a window of a professional brick and mortar retail. Well, I had a software company on the second floor of this area, and it was a picnic area. Tons of doors down below us into these outlets that people rented, and we had all these smokers that would come and huddle straight below the window. In the summertime, we didn't need to run our air conditioner as long as we keep the windows open. But if we kept the windows open, we had all the smokers downstairs filling up our entire place with smoke. And even if we did close the doors or close the windows and turn the air conditioning on, it went over the roof into the system right into our office. I had a recovering cancer patient as an employee. She was in full remission, of course, but it just wasn't good. Eventually, I had a pregnant employee. So I petitioned to the property manager, and they moved the ashtrays, the physical ashtrays, further away. Because I told them, I said, you can't put ashtrays where they're illegal to use, right? So they obliged very courteously. And then I called the cops. And I said, what's the deal with this thing? I said, if you guys could just pay a little visit down here, just, yeah, I don't want people arrested or anything, but just remind people that there is, you know, some ordinance down here. And they said, you know, it does exist, but we don't enforce it. And I understand, you know, they're chasing real crimes and doing real things. But it was very interesting. California has passed props preventing illegal immigrants from taking advantage of certain public services. This is probably about 20 years ago. So we passed it as the citizens of the state. But the state comes in and says, we're not going to allow this prop to exist. What? You know, we voted on it, but we can't have what we vote for? And why do soldiers die again? I don't know enough about case law and the examples of case studies related to what I'm talking about to really give you super hardcore examples. But I think without being an attorney, each and every one of us can recall at least a relative, a friend, or maybe even our personal experience about contracts that may have been signed that were as close to fuckery as we can possibly define. How do we get a handle on that? How do we get a handle on companies like Apple that, without your knowledge, they're slowing down all of your devices? And why do they do it? Because they want you to buy a new device. Let me give you a little quiz in the computer realm just so that you can understand. One, you know, you can run a Microsoft Windows computer for a long time, and it's going to continue at the speed at which you bought it when you first got it. Now, software requires more and more processor power as time moves on. You know, video games get more intense, you know, just more calculations in any one piece of editing software or whatever. But the reason why is that Microsoft only makes the operating system. They don't make the computer. Now, they do make computers now, but they're not going to play any games, right? Because they'd have to play games with all the different processors, screwing them all up. And they're not going to do that. They've got Intel processors to take care of, AMD processors, NVIDIA processors, other processors. But Apple controls everything, right? They control the complete ecosystem of their computers and their devices. They pick the hardware, they write the software, and they put it all together. That gives them an advantage to injure their own ecosystem. Now, what's interesting is Steve Jobs used to always say, you know, we're the Sony, we're the Mercedes, and Microsoft is the Toyota or something like that, right? I will never agree that that's a good idea. I will agree that that was definitely the case. You know, they were like the Trinitron. Best TV on the planet back in the day, but the most expensive as well. So they sold very few units compared to the rest of the units in the world. And so Sony is currently on life support right this very second. Well, I got a pretty good tunnel going on this cigar here. Look at that. You cigar smokers. Big old hole in there. See where that goes. But then the corporation gets to lie. The people have known this, the tech people have known this for a very long time. And the real telltale sign is this. If someone told you that the processor is a 64-bit processor and it runs at 3 gigahertz, all right, that means 64 units of information / instructions can be fed into the chip at any one point in time, data streams, whatever you need. And then, based on the amount of transistors inside and the overall architecture of the chip, it's going to run at 3 gigahertz. When you bring it home, you are completely satisfied with the speed of the computer, or the telephone, or the tablet, or your watch, or whatever. But then, in the last 5 years especially, we're only barely getting to 4 gigahertz right now. There was a big article that someone had breached 5 gigahertz. But again, it's not for sale. They're just saying, in a laboratory, and we got to 5 gigahertz. Okay. Well, the 3 gigahertz 5-year-old model being slower than today's 3 gigahertz modern-day model is about as It makes about as much sense as you buying a Corvette with 600 horsepower. You wait 5 years and you buy another a Corvette, same cylinder count, same, piston diameter or whatever. There's no extra fuel injection on it. There's no extra turbos on it. Whatever you got in your 5-year model, it's in this recent model, but it's 600 horsepower. But now it can pass that car like it's like a red wagon, like it's being pulled by a human being. Wouldn't that seem a little strange, right? In the automotive business, if you have the same engineering company recreating engine after engine, I mean, you realize that F1 cars were faster in the past than they are today? Because it's just reality of horsepower, of how big the combustion chambers are, the pipe designs, the fuel designs. They weren't hybrids. Same thing goes for a computer. Now, for those of you who are old enough, this should make you go, okay. For those of you who aren't old enough, this should blow your mind. And I think I mentioned this one episode a long time ago, so if you remember this, you've seen them all, baby. Back in 1980, personal computers were brand new, okay? Apple had been making their Apple line 1 and 2 for about 4 years. The PC, I believe the IBM PC was released in 81, I think. I don't think it was in 80. But there was the Texas Instruments, there was the TSR 80 line, tons of computers. Everyone was trying to figure out who was going to win this battle, right? And the battle raged until pretty much the late 80s. But I watched receptionists, very specifically, who were amazing, who typed 120 words per minute. Just, in fact, the one I remember is on an Apple II computer. This woman was typing 120 words per minute. And they were doing the old-fashioned thing. She was typing and then would stop and count and subtract for, mistakes, which I don't think there were any. But this computer, I don't think had 1 megahertz. If it did, it had 1 megahertz, right? But it could handle it. It could handle it. If she needed to correct her typing, it would just be instantaneous. And yeah, it was a DOS-type interface, right? So you're looking at sort of a, black screen with the letters on it. But so what? You mean to tell me that by putting the words inside of a graphical user interface with fonts and shadows perhaps or whatever, you mean to tell me that I should be waiting for a character wrap to happen on a telephone that's over 1 million times faster than her computer, if not 4 million times faster than her computer? I don't buy it. They tell you that Apple tells you that they slow down your phone because the battery might do what my battery did, which is explode, just get bigger and bigger. Okay. But now what did Apple/Steve Jobs prove to the world on stage several times? When battery-operated devices first came out, like laptops and the first cell phones, they used to, when you put the power in, it would power the battery, but they still wired the circuit directly to the battery supply. So no matter what you were doing on your device, it used the battery. And then they got the smart idea. If it's plugged in, let's go ahead and route a direct wiring directly to the circuit. Go ahead and charge the battery, but once it's full, we'll just leave it alone. But for the entire time your device is plugged in, the battery's being bypassed. So this notion that you have had your digital device slow down because there's a battery in it should not be true if the device is plugged in. Now, I run Android, right, on my telephone. I will tell you, any one of you Apple people that are still running an iPhone, one, you're dealing with a glass screen, which obviously breaks almost every single time. I do have one friend with an Android with a broken screen, but I've heard that Androids use plastic for at least the Samsungs, which is what he has. I run the Note 8, which I love, man, let me tell you. But this phone is so much more advanced than the latest iPhone that has come out recently, which is the new, what is it, the XL, XR, all these different, $1,500 phones. My phone runs laps around them. My camera is so much better than their camera. I'm not noticing the total slowdown. I'm probably only plugged in at night and in the morning when I'm in bed, just checking out the news or whatever. But what if there was just a simple regulation for the United States of America, retroactively effective, that said you cannot hurt your customers intentionally? And if you are going to do any type of corporate strategy by which you are going to make the decision to advance your technology, you're going to have to support the old phone and its native processor integrity, meaning when you compile the operating system and you compile the applications, you're going to have to make sure that they are compatible with the chip that's in there, so they don't have to forward, pin counts and very specific access points in the microchip. Now, in the automotive business, what happens? You know that when you buy a car, the automotive business is obligated for a certain number of years. I cannot remember the amount of years. It might vary. But they have to keep parts available for your car. Quarter panels, hoods, steering wheels, brake pads, everything. They have to be able to prove to the United States of America that they are capable of servicing your car. Well, that sounds pretty cool, right? I have never heard in my life a car being taken in for a repair and then all of a sudden it goes 40 miles an hour slower. But that's happening with all digital devices, isn't it? I know you guys feel me, but I want to kind of drive that home, give you some examples. Now, we know that there are Ponzi schemes out there where people are lured into investments with false pretenses, meaning the business is not operating like the person who's taking their money is pitching it. In some cases, the businesses don't exist. They're fake corporations. They're showing them photographs of some other location in the world, which has nothing to do with their proverbial location that they're selling, stock bonds for or whatever. And they go to jail for a very short period of time in most cases, right? And to put it in perspective, you have to change the players. If a billionaire Ponzi scheme like a Milken, who sold junk bonds, takes the world for $1.5 billion, he just does a few years in prison. It's pretty amazing. But now, if you were to do business with, say, the United States government, and you took the United States government for $1.5 billion, I'm thinking you're not going to see the light of day for a really long time. Why is it different? Huh? Why is it when your grandparents get had, there's no real penalties? I just learned that a really good friend of mine put, I think, about $400,000 in gold about 10 years ago. I'm assuming based on the data from the deal, they got him in when gold was about $1,700 an ounce, which happened for a really short period of time. His broker sat on this thing, and they weren't real gold. He didn't get coins out of it or bullion that he could put in a safety deposit box. He got gold certificates, right? Commodity certificates, right? Which, if you're going to invest in gold, get the fucking gold, would you? At least you got something to fall back on. So he puts this money in, and the guy loses nearly all of it. This is a chunk of my friend's life savings. Thank God he's got plenty more. But the guy didn't tell him for $400,000 that he was losing it every single day. At the end of the entire run, about a year and a half later, he came to my friend and said, "Sorry, but we've lost it all." Now, the firm that did it made commission fees off of every maneuver they made with my friend's money. So they never lost a dime. In fact, who knows who he bought those stock certificates from, those gold certificates from. Could have bought it from one of his more preferred clients. He said, don't worry, I got this sucker over here. If we need to liquidate for Mr. Johnson over there who's got, $100 million in our organization, we'll bail him out with this guy's money, and fuck this guy. He's nobody, right? But there was no recourse for my friend to suggest that, wait a minute, he's not an expert in this stuff. He was trusting this individual. And, of course, that's where America, at least, I don't know about Europe, but America will say, well, that's your responsibility. You trusted the wrong person. But this is a major, major investment house, right? He had no recourse, even though the person, once they lost $100,000, you'd think that they would liquidate and move it into something else. Or at least notify the client and say, hey, look, gold's dropping. Our strategy with gold is to say you stay in for 20 years. So we think it'll rebound, or at least you won't lose it all. But they didn't. They waited until it was all gone. I'll tell you a really funny story in my own personal life. I think I was 19 years old. And so that would have been about 1988. And I had a gentleman, because I was a big tech guy and my reputation in certain circles penetrated deep into various interesting places, right? And so I had a dude come to me when I was 19 years old. I think I was 19. And I was a lead engineer at the TurboTax place for one of the platforms. And the guy pitched me this new thing that was coming. He said, there's this thing coming where all these computers are going to be networked together and the whole world's going to get to trade information. They're going to get to sell things. So if you have anything you want to sell, you can sell it online, this new thing. I hope you're sensing what I'm talking about here. I was talking about the goddamn internet coming online in 1988. The HTTP protocol, I don't think, had been completely invented, and that was a scrape out of SGML, which was a sort of an HTML version of PostScript, if you will, for those guys that are techie. Now, at the time, I was renting some space, a garage, a really nice garage, from a really wealthy family. So the son and I were always up to something. He was a little bit younger than me, but he was very, very smart. Still is. And he and I got the kit. This guy sent me this kit. I think it was like $500. I think. Something like that. And it, now looking back, was essentially the budding infrastructure for the internet. And what he was offering was a methodology for me to buy a series of PCs, put modem racks on them, and essentially be an internet hub. I could offer services on my computers that other computers didn't have. It was the beginning of the internet. But I went to the family and sat down and did a whole presentation to them. And of course, they couldn't conceive of what the hell I was talking about. And what they told me was, this sounds great. This really does sound great. We know you're techie enough to be able to take advantage of what this guy's offering. We trust this is a fairly decent opportunity, but we have recently, say in the last 5 years, been taken by a guy that Ponzi schemed us with a bunch of steel. I don't know the details of the venture they went into, but they said they were lured into buying a bunch of steel commodities, and it fell through, and they lost a bunch of money. I have no idea how much money they lost, but it was enough to scar them badly. So what ended up happening was that I missed out on an opportunity to get on the internet about the time Bezos was probably getting in on the internet, right? I forgot how much money I needed to really make this thing happen, but computers were not cheap back in those days. But because of a predatorial group of people, the investors that I talked to were not going to invest in anything besides their own business. Now, who knows if I would have been able to make this a profitable deal, but in the end, it was because of some fuckery that I couldn't get the money. And that's the way a lot of investments go, right? And let's go into some of these sort of predatorial folks for 1 second here. You have people that have dreams of which they aren't capable of actually fulfilling. Either they don't have the devotion to keep the business going, or they don't have the knowledge base to really move it to the next step and the next step and the next step. Okay? So sometimes you will invest in folks that are simply making mistakes. And it's up to you to figure out whether or not they have the tenacity to pull it off. So it's kind of a homegrown adventure, but it's a legit adventure, right? You don't know that someone doesn't have the capability of doing something until they fail, right? That's why the interview process is really, really important. What have you done before that's like this? Where have you succeeded like this? Where have you hung on to a project for 5 years like this before? Do you understand how difficult this is? You know, you have to ask questions about, you know, what's your family life like? Do you have newborns that you have to take care of? You know, how many times do you think you should be on vacation? Et cetera, et cetera. Do you have a drinking problem? Do you have marital problems? All these things, you have to ask those questions. I've got an entrepreneurial video back in season 1, I believe, that's real important if you're in this state. You're going to put some money in something. Go watch those episodes first before you cream yourself. But then you have folks that are blowing smoke. They don't really have a product. Now, maybe they wouldn't mind if the product showed up. You know, they wouldn't mind if their employees were actually able to pull off the inventions that they're talking about. But you have these pitch guys that run around and grab cash, right? And they will use all kinds of tactics on you to get your juices flowing that are completely deceptive. One of the most common tactics I see, if we're just going to freestyle deception here, is that they will say, let's say they're getting into robotics. Now, right now in the world, robotics is a hot fucking commodity, man. I mean, it's so hot. But there's a limited amount of people in the world that have the scientific capability of really innovating something that hasn't been innovated. So you're either going to have to be a super skilled knockoff artist, or you're going to have to be someone who's ingenious that understands perhaps some of the needs that aren't being met by the current commitments and promises from the industry. Maybe like true artificial intelligence. I don't know. I'm not really concerned with the details, but what they will do in their deck, right, their presentation that they'll put together in PowerPoint or Keynote, they're bringing it to you to get you all juiced up, and it is a psychological attack on your system, right? And these guys are amazingly good at this. I mean, hats off to their ability to tell a story and get you excited. Okay, that's why they get to drive around the Bentley, and meanwhile you're furnishing all the cash and you're driving around in like a Corolla, right? Nothing against Corollas, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a difference in the quality of life between the two of you. What they will do is they will quote the entire industry and all the money that's going to be put into this industry. I'll give you an example. Virtual reality, for instance, has fallen on its face once again. Oculus, 5 years from now, will be an utter memory. Magic Leap will never get off the ground. HTC Vive will also be a memory. All this stuff will be a memory. Even the augmented reality stuff, well, it'll remain inside your telephone. So it'll use your camera and your telephone and do funny things in your desktop, but none of it will make any significant amount of money. Now, there'll be other things that pop out of maybe hybrids for virtual reality surgeries and that kind of stuff. So there will be some uses, but it'll be very limited. Very limited purse from what they said. But I was involved in a virtual reality project through a startup I created a couple of years ago. And there's episodes that I made while I was doing this venture. But I give lectures and stuff on it in colleges and VR groups and that kind of thing. And I would hear the other lectures, trying to stimulate everyone into getting involved. And one of the things that we would constantly hear was that Wall Street planned on investing, the numbers varied, but it was between $100 and $200 billion were going to be invested in VR and AR. So this was going to be hot, and you can't even fail, right? Now, the reality was this. I was involved with folks that knew the biggest investors in the world. And that's really not an exaggeration. What we were offering was an experience that the world is yet to have. But everybody who came to my little laboratory and got to see it, just a tidbit of this experience. Talking, again, heads of studios, heads of special effects outfits, people that were the top of Hollywood. I mean, they are the illusionists that make it all happen. They would come in and see our fairly small demo, and their jaws were on the ground. They were utterly blown away. Some people leaped away from the screen when certain things would happen. It was all based on some 3D technology. But again, we did it in a way that no one else had done it. I'm still working on this venture, but I'm working on it in a different capacity. But we couldn't find these investors that seem to be giving infinite cash to projects like Magic Leap, Oculus, and HTC Vive, right? But our offering was 100 times better than any of those other offerings. It didn't require that you wore a headset. So we designed a platform that allowed an audience to have a mutual experience that was, you know, again, no one on planet Earth has ever had this experience, except the people that came to see our demo. And even our demo wasn't able to take advantage of all of the ingenuity that we had put into the system. So how did the other guys make the money? Well, there's nothing more alluring than having a sort of finished prototype that you can put on someone's head and say, this just needs to be polished and you can be sold. So it's definitely an advantage there. But what I see is that someone will walk in and, again, claim the full metric of a particular sector and say, well, like your buddy will come in and say, hey, I'm going to get into the citrus termite business, right? And what they do is they run off and grab the metrics of pesticide, pest control. Maybe it's, say, $1 billion industry per year. But they'll go to their neighbor and say, look, this is $1 billion industry. And if we can just capture 1% of $1 billion, boom, we're rolling in cash, right? So I just need to borrow $500,000 out of your life savings so that we can capture this $10 million industry for ourselves, right? So people cough it up. But there's no real connection between the person pitching you this thing and the big money that's out there. The big money that's out there is held by usually, 60 to 80%. It's held by one player in the business, right? Like I always try to remind people, I work for Electronic Arts. We were the first company, I think in 1999, we hit $1 billion. The next year, I think we hit $3 billion in gross sales. We're the first video game company to ever pull that off. Okay. Today, EA is number 2. Activision Blizzard is number 1. Well, what's the difference between number 1 and number 2? Well, the market cap, and again, this is old data, probably a couple years old when I last looked it up, but the market cap for Activision Blizzard, I think, was around $24.9 billion. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean they're making that per year, but EA's market cap, last time I looked it up, was about $7 billion. So Activision and their business model were way more successful being a publisher than being technically the game developer. They just found studios making hot products, signed them up, and they had the distribution around the world, now which is now largely just digital distribution online. But they create these famous stores, and people pay money to get in those stores because they get preferential promotion out of thin air, right? So number 2 is a lot different than number 1. Well, if you're investing in a new business, you're usually not anywhere close to that. So to muscle out companies that have billions of dollars per year, it's pretty hard to do, okay? Now, could there have been a way that Little Richard sells his entire catalog, knowing what he's doing, that would have been less criminal? And again, what happened to him back in the day was technically not a crime, because the laws supported the record companies that did that to him. I believe it was Motley Crue and maybe even Van Halen, I can't remember, but One of those two bands sold their entire catalog. Prince sold his catalog, for sure. Now, the rumor was that Prince made anywhere from 150 million to like 100 million. He disputed that in interviews afterwards. But I think that the catalogs of other bands have gone up to $800 million. And of course, they're making an investment such that they do the math. They say, how many records do you sell every single month? This many. Okay, are you on tour anymore? Not really. We're just doing kind of reunion stuff. We're not writing any new music, so this is it. So I think that the way that it could have been more ethical, maybe that's the word we should be using on this episode title somehow, would be that Little Richard's done. He's in the 80s. He's made a ton of money off of his catalog because he's owned it the entire time. And he makes a strategic decision. He's like, look, it's not that I'm not going to go out and play my own music and make money off of touring and that kind of thing, but the royalties I get off these records is not that intense anymore. So let's say he made, again, I got a buddy of mine that I may interview next year, and I can't reveal numbers, but he's a very, very successful musician. But when I heard the numbers coming in off of the royalties off of record sales for bands that have tons of platinum albums, it's not what you think. It's not what you think. You got to generate money from something else if you want to keep up your lifestyle. Otherwise, you would have had to have invested your money very wisely, right? You have to live off of your dividends of other things. So Little Richard might say, look, he's making, let's say, $50,000 a year off of his catalog, and he's like, look, I'm only going to live X number of years. He puts that on paper. More. And so he decides to sell his catalog for $50 million. Because for him, he's like, I'll never make that much money from the royalties, and if I decide to stop touring, at least I have the money in the bank, and I got some investment ideas, and ba-ba-ba. And he can do that, and it's a very ethical, upfront negotiation. When you write film, for instance, well, if you're unknown, you're going to get, obviously, a much smaller purchase price for your script than you would be if you were known to knock it out. Now, they may look at your script and go, oh my God, this thing's going to be worth $1 billion too, right? But let's see if we can't get the script for like $150,000. A famous script writer, they might be able to make $750,000 to $1 million. Same exact product, it's going to gross the same amount of money, but because you're new, you're like, Jesus, I got to get into this industry. And yes, there are unions that try to help you out, and there's agencies that try to help you out. But then the agencies will do business with the studios, and they'll make money off the film. They negotiate the sale of the script, so you get your money. And depending on how tenacious you are and how knowledgeable you are about the business, they will, if they get the movie greenlit, which is a miracle, they'll work out points with the studio. So, movie makes $1 billion, they get a point. There's $10 million straight into the agency. So then you start to become a hot commodity within the agency. Like, keep that guy happy because he just made his $10 million. Plus a little scratch off of his script. Whatever he needs, let's just keep him well fed. They'll be willing to put $100,000 into you, right? They'll come to you and say, what you working on? I got these 4 scripts ideas. Which one do you think is more apt to sell in the next couple of years? And then, oh, definitely that one right there. Okay. Do you need anything? I'm like, yeah, well, I would like to get out of LA to write this one. It's got that tropical feel. You mind if I go to Hawaii to write this one? They're like, yeah, we'll put you up ourselves. We'll take it right out of our own purse. Because if you hit it, again, like you did in the previous script, maybe it's worth 1.5 points. Maybe it's worth 2 points, whatever. I'm just making all this up in terms of the points. But you're worth money to them, right? We know that society is very docile to manipulation and being taken advantage of. It's almost like the society itself can't defend itself. And so this is how this stuff continues to get more acidic and more predatorial. And then when someone gets screwed, there's a weird little phenomenon that happens in society. If it's you getting screwed, you're pissed off. If it's your grandmother, your uncle, your father, your mother, your wife, your husband, your kids. You're pissed off and you want justice. But in America, we have this thing that's really weird. I know it exists in other places, but I can only speak for the place I come from. You know, one of the reasons why tabloid news is so lucrative is that people want to see people who have things lose things. They love it. Well, at least somebody got it, right? They might feel like they're getting screwed because they perhaps mismanaged their life, or perhaps they're just the victim of circumstances. They've done everything right according to the books, but they're eating it. And so they want some sort of posthumous retaliation. And so everyone huddles around to see people get eaten by lions, right? What do you think the Colosseum was all about back in the day? The more that Rome and the current Caesar repressed the people, they got their relief by seeing innocent people torn to pieces, right? I mean, you may have a thief down there, but he's not committed a crime that, is punishable by lion eating, right? So I think society as a whole has to take their own suffering and say, instead of reveling in someone else's suffering to act as a therapeutic aid, they're going to have to say, wait a minute, this shouldn't be happening at all to anyone, because it wouldn't want to happen to me. To go back to France for a second, it was very interesting that we believe that we have pretty decent history when the French Revolution took place in the late or the early 1790s, right? It was 1793, I think, that people started getting their heads cut off, right? But someone said in my smoke lounge, well, back in those days when this started happening, they just got absolutely crazy with cutting people's heads off. The crowd would just point at someone and say, that guy. They grab him. There's no trial. There's no evidence that's presented, or there's no representation. You got pushed down in front of that guillotine. They chopped your head off. Maybe you were completely innocent. But no matter what, a crime is not always punishable by capital punishment, right? Death. It was said in China when Mao Zedong became the, I guess the president, and you call him that, emperor, whatever, I don't know what they call them over there. But he had 2 phases of mass murders where they estimate up to 40 million people were murdered. And again, there's no Holocaust museum to that shit. But they, as I had it described to me by a person who studies Chinese history a lot, the first beheadings that they used to do with swords was that they had a lot of slumlord landlords, for real. People that were just, forcing people to live in squalor, never fixing anything, people getting sick, malnutrition, blah, blah, blah. And so they had this point where, just like France is, starting to push back, they grabbed all the landlords and cut their heads off. And everyone's watching. Everyone's there. Little kids are watching. And then the second phase went on to the resistors of the government. Because the government said to the people, you see, we got something done. The bad guys got it. So we're good. We let you kill your landlords. Now, do us a favor. Kill everyone who resists us. And they did. Whole nother set of killings. Just anyone who accused anyone, wrong place, wrong time, no trial, no nothing, you got killed. We got to be careful we don't do this again. And that's why it's dangerous when history isn't really taught. Russia had its dark day as well. I think that the genetics that exist in Russia are probably not bound to repeat their history as they did around World War II. And because of World War II, they had a big group of people that were murdered because they didn't want to fight the Nazis. Because the Nazis had it dialed in. You know, they had a massive technology strategy on the battlefield. I mean, they were blitzkrieging the shit out of Russia for a little while until, just like Napoleon, they lost their army due to the seasons, the winter season, which is brutal in Russia. Russia is almost perfectly protected by their winters. It's amazing. But now we have seen a bit of a turn recently. I think it was Monsanto recently lost a case to a gentleman here in California who was told that dealing with glyphosate, which is Roundup, to treat his crops after he bought the GMO seeds was a safe thing to handle. He ended up getting terminal cancer. He's still alive, but he won in court. I believe that the winnings were nearly $500 million, 480-something million, I think. And I believe they awarded him more money than he asked for, which is it happens, right? When you get a good jury. But we have people that kill people that get off scot-free. And it's not always an act of self-defense. Sometimes it's straight up premeditated first-degree murder. But there'll be politics that let someone off scot-free. The illegal immigrant in San Francisco that got off killing this woman, Kate. I think he committed a crime within 6 months of being let off, right? The judicial system, I should say, in America, you know, you try things in front of a judge to the point the case gets appealed up to a jury trial. And then we, as the people, have to make the difference. And my fear is that as long as the laws are always sort of capable of being interpreted, that a lot of times they'll tell you that something was legal, even though great harm was done to someone. And so you might be told by a judge, you have to follow the letter of the law. And so corporations get away scot-free with this stuff. If Chuck Berry had taken his case to court, which I don't know if he ever did, he would lose. Most likely. Although everyone walking out of the court would know he got screwed. All right. Well, how do you counteract that, right? Well, the best way would be to change the laws. And that's something we need to do. But maybe the fix in the short term is to simply be good human beings to each other. There should be a class action lawsuit, in my opinion, against Apple Computer, or Apple as they call themselves today, for slowing down devices intentionally. Oh, maybe it's legal. But in the end, if I came in, say I sold you your house, and then I come back by and I ring the doorbell and I say, look, you know I sold you your house, but you know this driveway that was all cracked, you know, the cement was all split up, this patio is pretty split up right here. But they come back and offer me a new driveway, a new patio. And I say, okay. And they replace it with something that's absolutely horrible. It's so horrible that now I can't use it anymore. Can't park my car in the driveway, can't come out on the patio. Something's wrong with it. It's toxic. It cracks even worse. Well, it looked good for a few days, but then it was bad. Well, you agreed to let me put this inferior product on top of a product that, even though it was injured, was still performing better than the one I replaced it with. Oh, you signed all the documents to let me do it. Maybe you signed a little indemnity clause that said I'm not responsible for whatever happens to this thing. Me, the guy who, or them, I should say, that replaced this previous product. You should be able to take me to court and say, look, I had a completely functional driveway. Yeah, it was cracked. So cosmetically, it wasn't the most beautiful thing in the world, but I could at least use it. These people told me they're going to replace it with something better. Turned out to be a complete bunk experience. They pawned off some cheap crap on me. Charged me full price. If you're going to upgrade your phone, let's just say, with a new operating system, away from the original, and they're not telling you that this is going to slow down your phone, slow down your computer, and what percentage of which that's going to occur, based on the model of your computer and the version of the operating system, I'd say that's a crime. That's just my opinion. Now, some of you might be thinking, let's go into Apple devices. You might be thinking, well, all I have to do is get out my original discs that came with the computer, I reinstalled the operating system that was compatible with my processor. Ah, but they got you. There's something called the ROM update. It's this weird little update that happens inside your hardware. The software in your hardware gets upgraded. And no matter if you roll back the operating system, that ROM is still making everything slow. And so you're screwed. I've had hardware tech guys refute this with me. And so I ask them, I say, when's the last time you wrote some code? I don't write code. I replace screens on telephones. And then I'm sitting there going, well, then shut the fuck up. You have no technical know-how as to how a processor interprets instructions from a software set. Right? But they're the guys that will sit up there, they're fanboys or whatever, their job is related to this or whatever, and they perpetuate the deception because they don't want to have to deal with the repercussions. So you'll have those people too. What baffles me is that, and I've said this in previous episodes, but why do people buy Honda and Toyota? Because it has the best resale value of any automotive company on planet Earth. It's got easy maintenance. The cars barely need any maintenance. They can go for 200,000 to 300,000 miles before they really start crapping the bed. That's value. Well, I got friends of mine that won't buy anything but Honda. I have friends of mine that won't buy anything but Toyota because they get that value out of the system. And can you blame them? So what does any company want from its customers? They want loyalty. What would a record company want from musicians? Loyalty, right? You got a band that's just coming up in your neighborhood. They are a badass, man. They play whatever music you love and they play it perfectly. But now they have a commodity that they get to market to record companies. And again, record companies have changed quite a bit. Well, most of them are out of business, but most of them have been forced to come up with better contracts. You do own your masters and all this other stuff. But it took, 50 years of fuckery to get people to go in with their commodity and saying, look, you're not the only record company in town, so unless you give me a decent contract, you're not getting my business. Okay, I'll give you a good contract. But they're still trying to screw you as much as they possibly can, right? That's the name of the game. You just need a few landmark cases before things change. What if Apple got nailed for this deception game they're playing where they slow down your devices on purpose? The people don't take it anymore. They put down their fluoridated toothbrush. They refuse the vaccinations, whatever it takes. They eat meat. And they realize they do have a resistance gene inside of them. It's not resistance against being treated nicely. It's resistance against getting screwed. We stand up and we shove a class action lawsuit right up the pooper of some of these corporations. And they lose because the jury's like, yeah, you are going to, and by the way, it's a pretty simple fix on Apple's part, especially. But the courts say, here's what you're going to pay everybody out of your, whatever it is, $200 billion in cash you got in the bank. This is what you're going to pay every former customer of yours for damages. Because again, if you have to buy a new phone in 2 years, that's damages because you can't use your previous phone because it's too damn slow to type on. Again, something that a sub-megahertz computer could do at 120 words per minute with no problem back in 1980. So again, if they're going to brag about Moore's Law, where everything gets twice as fast in a certain interval, then you can't have things slowing down because they haven't been able to double the megahertz of a computer for more than 15 years, right? We should have 6 gigahertz machines today, not be so impressed that we can hit 5, right? But all they need to do to fix your computer, fix your phone, your tablet, whatever you have that's been slowed down, is they take the operating system and they compile it for the processor that's inside your device. They redo the ROM, so it's built for your device, your full schematics of your hardware. You would install that update, which would just simply sense what model you're running on, and your device would instantaneously go back to the way it was the day you bought it. Hell, if they ever wrote tighter code, it would be even faster, right? If you have 100 lines of code and you can reduce it to 10, Well, when you're onboarding all of the instructions into the processor, it's done 10 times faster. So I think you feel me. We just freestyled this one today. We freestyle all of them, but I didn't sit down with anything on my mind. But this is sort of getting at this thing. I wanted to go after Apple because it used to be a fantastic company. Steve Jobs is definitely responsible for creating this intentional obsolescence. He wrote tons of emails about this kind of thing, so it's definitely where he and I differ. When I had the privilege of working with his team, he sent his, I think it was his acting CFO, and really his real title was head of worldwide development / strategies and that kind of thing. But Apple was less global at the time than they are today. We sat and had a couple beers, and he was really interested in my opinion about, how to strategize the company moving forward, which I thought was pretty phenomenal. But the thing I said to him was, the iMac was out at the time and just cleaning up house, man. It was like a $1,300 computer, $1,299. And, we all know the story. It absolutely blew up and put them back on the map. But they were about to come out with their G4s, which were, the graphite G4s, which were amazing. I still have one that he gave me. And I told him, I said, look, you got to, if you want to put yourself back on the map, you're really going to have to create a blazingly fast computer for a really inexpensive price. There's just no other way around it, because people are now, at the time, walking away from your products. This was in 1999. And, they said, they definitely were thinking about that kind of strategy. And I think when the G4 came out, I can't remember what it cost, but it was super affordable for the amount of horsepower that you got. I mean, it smoked any PC that I had. So my personal issue with Apple was that I thought, okay, you do this. Of course, it wasn't as bad as it is today, too. So the thing is that we could all kind of sense things were slowing down after software updates. But at the time, we went from sort of casual GUI interfaces to seriously layered interfaces. But being in the game industry, I had a very privileged view as to what these processors could do. And so let me give you just a little litmus test that you can use when you are thinking about this, okay? A couple litmus tests are, one, these computers haven't gotten much faster, but they continually get slower the older that they get, and they only get slower after your software update, period, right? But you want, the last probably 4 or 5 updates of the Mac OS offered you nothing. I mean, there was just more social media crap stuck in your operating system that you don't want, right? All these fucking notifications. But the last one, Mojave, is actually pretty cool. It's got dark mode, which I love dearly. But my hope was that they would cease doing this, right? Now, they're giving it to you for free. That's the other thing, too. So I think there might be some legalese and identification, because, hey, you don't have to download this and we're giving it to you for free, so we don't owe you any money. But there's still damages when, like I had a computer that was well within the 3 gigahertz rate, 8 processors, and I got this graphical job for a buddy of mine to do promotions for a very famous movie chain here in Los Angeles only. And I had to deal with, really gigantic files. Like probably files that are anywhere from 150 meg to 350 meg. Super high res things. I'm doing all this composite work. Okay. My computer couldn't handle it. Eventually it just got to the point where watching a filter go, I could go get, a cup of coffee in the time it took to complete. And so I went into my garage and I found one of my computers from my game company that was much newer than the one I had. And so I pulled it in, swapped it out, started running the plugins, and it was really fast. I was thinking, wait a minute, these two computers are identical in megahertz, both 64-bit, just a couple of years apart from each other. One was a 2008, one was a 2010. I was doing this work in like 13, so that's how recent these computers were. So I was able to get back on my feet, had to move all my software and files over, and then, of course, with a couple updates, that computer became unusable. I mean, unusable. At least in a professional capacity, but even boot times took a really long time. I now have a computer that is going on, 2 years old. I bought the top of the line. Top of the line. Everything you could put in there, boost the processor, boost the memory, all that good stuff. And now I'm starting to see the fatigue. I'm starting to wait for things I didn't used to wait for. Well, it's obviously Mojave, which updated my ROM. I've got an Android Note 3 that is still pretty damn fast. It's got a battery issue I need to replace. I don't use it anymore because I upgraded my phone. But I was able to wait, I guess, 5 years before I updated it. Super cool. There used to be a time you only got a trophy if you won the game. Now they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so they hand out trophies to all the kids. I personally don't know how a child looks at a trophy for losing and feels any accolade in their heart, but maybe they do. The laws have started to become the loser trophy. You screw someone over, you don't win. But somehow we feel better or something. I don't get it. I think some people say, oh, don't sue that poor corporation. I love them. I have their logo all over my shit. It's bad enough that probably 2/3 of the products sold in America, if not higher, are made exclusively by what we would classify as slave labor. You know, and the poverty index, again, I've lamented on the show that, you know, some countries you can make $2.50 a day, and you're living just as good as someone making $120,000 a year here, several $100s a day here, right? So I'm not as concerned about that as I am them working 16-hour days, 6 days a week to facilitate a want in a Western country. But as soon as, like, what was it? The woman that used to be the sidekick of Regis, the Regis show. I forget, Kathy Lee, I think was her name. She got busted for getting clothing made by sweatshops in South America or something, or in China. Or I forgot where it was, right? She gets crucified for slave labor. But a corporation that does it, that has a polished, really nice box, that tries to, you know, block everyone from walking in their store to create a line out front, they're good. They're good, right? I'm just calling out an area I think we need to talk about a little bit. Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's audio, video, a locked Facebook group, and a Patreon page. Gonna do a short bumper today. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.